An opioid overdose emergency in Arizona, what it means for Pima County.
We had 6 deaths among teenagers, for instance. Those were 6 deaths that did not need to occur.
Local governments oppose more border wall spending.
You know, we are elected to represent the voice of the people, and that's what we're trying to do.
That will cause irreparable economic, relational, and ecological damage.
2 fire districts consider consolidating, and Tucson may soon have a new Catholic bishop. This is Metro Week. Hi, I'm Andrea Kelly. Thanks for joining us. Governor Doug Ducey this week declared a statewide health emergency because of a record number of opioid overdose deaths. His proclamation calls on the state health department to work with local health agencies. We'll find out what Pima County's role is after a look at other stories from the Arizona Public Media Newsroom this week.
The U.S. Forest Service has okayed a step in the permitting process for the Rosemont copper mine south of Tucson. The approval of the environmental analysis for the proposed mine moves the project one step closer to opening. The 142-page record of decision ends 3 years of debate over the environmental impact of the mine in relation to there being an endangered ocelot living in the area. The Army Corps of Engineers still must make a clean water permit decision, and the National Forest Service still must approve the mine plan of operations before any digging can begin. 75% more pedestrians have died in Tucson traffic this year over a year ago. Tucson Police Sergeant Michael Deesh says the increase has one cause: jaywalking. So far this year, 12 pedestrians have been killed compared with 3 in 2016. Police officials say the jaywalkers who have been killed more often than not have been under the influence of alcohol or drugs. Tucson State Senator Steve Farley is officially in the Democratic primary for governor. Farley is the assistant minority leader in the state Senate and an outspoken critic of Governor Doug Ducey. He joins 2 others in the Democratic gubernatorial primary. And the Tucson Unified School District Board began a series of public hearings this week to help select a new superintendent. At the first meeting, the public was asked for input on what they want to see in a superintendent. An advisory committee will begin to screen the candidates next month. The board hopes to make a decision by August. For more on all of the week's top stories, visit our website news.azpm.org.
Statewide, opioid overdoses have risen 74% in the last 4 years. Dozens of those deaths were in Tucson. How will Pima County work with the state to reduce the number this year? I asked Pima County's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Francisco Garcia.
I believe that the declaration of a state of emergency helps create a level of public awareness and hopefully public buy-in into the fact that we need some comprehensive solutions and that we need some resources to be able to deal with this issue.
Is there a public role? I mean, for somebody who is not themselves an addict or doesn't have somebody in the household who's addicted, what would be the general public role?
Even though we might not personally be touched by addiction, it is 4 degrees of separation in terms of the people who are in all our lives. We know that, for instance, as many as 20% of kids who are seniors in high school have tried opioids. That's a really high figure. So 1 in 5 kids, and the number even goes up higher as you get older. So all of us are touched by it, whether we know it or not, and so creating awareness is always a positive thing.
And of course, the problem is that opioids are more highly addictive than some other drugs, so trying it can potentially easier lead to addiction. Is that right?
You know, addiction's a really complicated behavior and is a really complicated disease state. One of the things that I think is positive about this whole thing is that at least we're having a conversation about the fact that A, it's a disease and not a character flaw. B, that addiction is a complicated thing that requires lots of different resources and lots of different energy to be able to overcome. Yes, opioids in particular, that is heroin and Percocet and morphine and that whole class of opioid drugs, whether they are illicit or whether they're prescription, are highly addictive. And that's part of the reason why we want to try to make sure that people are aware of that and try to make sure that access to those medications is restricted as much as possible.
And that's actually a component of the governor's recommendations. I'm going to read those. There were sort of 4 steps that he wants the state to focus on, which is preventing prescription abuse through the prescribing practices, developing guidelines for responsible prescribing practices, expanding access to treatment, and then reducing overdoses through the distribution of naloxone.
There are practices in Pima County that are already doing really good things in the area of prescriptive practices, that is appropriate pain medication prescription writing. El Rio and TMC are among kind of the leaders in terms of making sure that their providers, that their healthcare providers know how to appropriately administer these really important medications. Let's make sure that we understand that people in pain really do need medication help, but that there are ways of prescribing that to decrease the risk for addiction and decrease the long-term dependence. So that's a really critical piece. In Tucson and in Pima County, we already are working with law enforcement with TPD to make Narcan not just available, but to bring it into use within that setting. And Chief Magnuson has been absolutely brilliant in terms of identifying this as a really important issue. Narcan's an expensive medication. One of the things that I hope that comes from the governor's declaration are some resources to support the purchase of a fairly expensive pharmaceutical for the hands of law enforcement.
What other steps, besides the 4 the governor outlined, would you be recommending to our community to work on this issue?
The big thing for us is to try to curb use, especially among children. Like I said, it's a surprisingly high number of children that are being exposed to a variety of substances. And opioids, prescription drugs, are the kinds of things that people are taking off of their parents' shelf, their grandparents' shelf. They're not the kinds of things that are necessarily being purchased illicitly. But it's happening. We know that about 72% of high school seniors in Pima County are using alcohol. We know that as many as 50% are using marijuana. We know that as many as 40% have used tobacco. All these things go together. These are risk-taking behaviors that we want to try to minimize. And so for us, it's really important to partner with our school districts, to really partner with a superintendent's office to be able to develop educational programming to try to prevent that.
Dozens of people died in 2016 in the Tucson metro area due to opioid overdoses. But I think you've already suggested that's just, deaths is just the tip of the iceberg here. The problem can be a lot bigger. So help shape that for us. You've done that with high schools. How big is the problem?
So in Pima County, we have over 1,750 hospitalizations associated with opioid overdoses and with overdoses of other substances. That's a lot. That is millions of dollars of expenditures, both from private health insurance and from access, that are going to treat and pay for these emergency room visits, for these hospitalizations. It's a number that has been growing across every single age group, beginning at about 20 to about 60, 70 years of age. Across all the age groups, emergency room visits are up, hospitalizations are up. So this is a really critical thing. In Pima County, we really haven't had a huge increase in the number of deaths. This year for 2016, we're reporting 263 deaths, so it's actually one more than last year. But if you look at a 10-year trend, you see that we started about 200 about 10 years ago, and so that is significant. To me, one of the things that's really compelling is that many of these deaths are happening in relatively young people and relatively productive people. We had 6 deaths among teenagers, for instance. Those were 6 deaths that did not need to occur. We have the bulk of the rest of the deaths happen between 20 and about 40, 50 years of age. So people are being affected when they are most productive.
There's more on Arizona's effort to combat the opioid epidemic coming up later on Arizona Week, including one woman's firsthand account of battling addiction. Now, local response to a federal issue. This week, the elected bodies of Pima County and the city of Tucson voted to oppose the president's proposed border wall. How much impact can the resolution have on a federal policy proposal? Elected officials in both governments, plus the Tohono O'odham and Pascua Yaqui tribes, gathered at City Hall to answer that question. Pima County Supervisor Richard Elias said it's not only those local governments versus federal officials.
We're really working with cities and counties across the nation that are passing similar kind of resolutions during the month of June in hopes of having the congressmen and congresswomen understand that they should not fund this wall because they don't have the money to do it.
Cities across the United States, mayors and councils throughout the United States, with the help of all of these organizations that I mentioned before, represent millions of residents in the country, millions of residents in the country, and in native nations. So, we are elected to represent the voice of the people, and that's what we're trying to do.
They cite several reasons for opposition to an expanded or new border wall.
The border wall is an odious symbol of division that will cause irreparable economic, relational, and ecological damage.
It's not every day that the Board of Supervisors and the City Council take up the same issue on the same day, and it's not every day that they come together to take a stand and adopt a joint resolution. We are living in a particularly difficult time, and there are those who are doing all they can to convince us that the only way we will ever be safe is to build more walls. But we, the people of Southern Arizona, have a different story to tell about the borderlands, about the beauty that has always existed in the mixing of cultures here in this place. In the midst of rugged terrain, life blooms in amazing ways. But in the past several years, we have seen the way in which people who do not understand the borderlands and the natural way in which people have always moved across borders for generations. We have seen the ways in which they have tried to solve the problems of our nation by convincing us that walls are the only thing that will save us.
The city and county are the latest local governments to oppose the wall.
When the executive order passed back in January of this year, the Legislative Council passed a resolution opposing the wall. And we have been opposed to the wall because it doesn't work. Not only that, but we have major waterways that run into our lands from Mexico during the monsoons. All that's going to be gone. The flora, the fauna, will be devastating for our natural resources. So it doesn't pay to build a wall on our lands. We don't support it. When we first took that position, we waited and waited. Finally, all the tribes supported us. And now we're getting more and more people supporting us. So thank you for supporting us.
We have always been very close to Tono'otam, the Latino community, the Mexican community. We know that everybody has migrated one way or another here. We ourselves come from hundreds and thousands of years, both tribes, that have walked these areas here. And for us, being part of this is what we have to do. We have to make sure that we band together and make sure that our people, our elders, our history does not fade away because of a wall somebody's trying to build.
The city and county resolutions call for an analysis of the cost and consequences of wall construction. The city resolution also calls for an end to investment in companies that profit from a wall construction project.
We are working with our city attorney to make sure that we define that in the future, and that the city council has the option of choosing how to invest the funds of the residents of Tucson, of the taxpayers of Tucson.
The Tucson City Council vote was unanimous. The Board of Supervisors vote split along party lines, 3 Democrats supporting it, 2 Republicans opposed. All the elected officials gathered at City Hall discussing the resolutions were Democrats. But one man outside City Hall said they don't represent everyone in the party.
For one thing, it'll have no meaning. Right now, nobody's in Washington, D.C. knocking on Donald Trump's door going, the city of Tucson, Arizona opposed the border wall. Trump don't care.
He says the border is not secure as long as drug trafficking and terrorism remain a threat to the country.
My grandchildren are actually half Hispanic, and I don't want them growing up in a world full of drugs.
The Catholic Bishop of Tucson, Bishop Kookiness, is preparing to retire this year, a standard action when a bishop turns 75. Kookiness joined me to talk about the process to appoint the next bishop and what's next for him.
Canon law, which is the law of the church, prescribes that a bishop, when he turns 75 on the day of his birthday, he should send a letter to the Holy Father indicating that he's reached the age of retirement. And so August of this past year is when I turned 75.
In 2016.
In 2016, and I wrote my letter to the Holy Father. And then he writes back saying, thank you, and nunc et tunc, which means now and until your replacement is named, you're still the bishop.
Okay, so you sent that letter, and then what process does that initiate?
So that begins a process of deciding who the next bishop will be, who could be anyone really. It could be a priest, could be any bishop from anywhere in the United States. And the process is conducted by a person who is called the Apostolic Nuncio, which is the Pope's representative here in the United States. We just had a recent change of Apostolic Nuncios. Our new nuncio's name is Christophe Pierre. He's a Frenchman. He served 9 years as the papal nuncio in Mexico. And so he knows this area quite well. He's fluent in French, he's fluent in English, and he's fluent in Spanish. He'll ask many people, what are the needs of the diocese? What are some of the challenges? What are the blessings? What's needed in the new bishop who will be appointed? And then he also consults many people from around the United States and from the diocese on suggested names. And so then he puts together what's called a terna, which are 3 names in order of preference. And he sends those over to the Congregation for Bishops, which is in Rome. And it's that congregation's responsibility to recommend to the Holy Father the person to be appointed. Now, the Pope doesn't have to appoint that person, but those are the suggestions that are given him.
In that process, and when you were poised to become Bishop of Tucson, do you have sort of job interviews? Do the candidates, I guess, have contact?
No, all of this happens rather mysteriously. So I had no clue that I would be appointed to be the coadjutor here in Tucson. In fact, I wasn't even aware that Bishop Moreno had actually asked for a coadjutor, someone to assist him because of his health. And so when I got the call from the Apostolic Nuncio, who at that time was Archbishop Cachavilan, he said, it was on Friday the 13th, I remember it vividly. Wow. I was giving a talk to some principals and priests from our community in Chicago, where I'm from. And someone gave me a note saying the Apostolic Nuncio called. Well, you know he doesn't call to ask about the weather. So I called him back, and he said, Bishop, I'm delighted to let you know that the Holy Father has appointed you, and of course your ear perks up, the coadjutor bishop in Tucson. At which point I said, pardon me, because I had only been to Tucson really 2 times, one for a personal retreat at the Redemptorist Renewal Center, and then when the bishops of the United States met here in 1999, I was also here for that. So it came as a total surprise, and I suspect whoever the bishop in Tucson will be, it will be a surprise to him as well.
Now, the timeline is, of course, out of your hands, but
Right.
once that transition starts, what will be your role in helping the next person get settled here?
So the retired bishop becomes what's known as the Bishop Emeritus, which means retired bishop. And usually retired bishops stay where they were, especially if they've been here for a while. So I've been here now almost 16 years, and so this has become home. And I always say that all the Chicagoans are coming to Tucson anyhow because of our beautiful community. So I plan to stay here and to be of help to the bishop in any way that I can. Retired bishops oftentimes are asked by various communities to give retreats. I'm on several boards that I'll continue to be on, the foundation board for the Catholic Relief Services, and also I'm what they call Vice Chancellor of the Catholic Extension Society, which helps all the mission dioceses of the United States, of which Tucson is one. And so I'll stay involved with those experiences as well. But mostly I want to be of help to the bishop. And the nice thing now is priests know you not as their boss, not as their bishop, but as a brother priest. And so it creates a whole different relationship now with the priests who are here and with the communities that I'll be privileged to be a part of.
Now we broaden it out a little bit. Why does Tucson have a diocese and a bishop? Not every city has that, so why Tucson?
No, so Tucson is a historic diocese, so we go back all the way to the 1800s. So it was the first diocese here in the state of Arizona. Tucson, while it is the senior diocese, is certainly smaller than Phoenix. Phoenix actually began as a diocese in 1969, so it's relatively new, and it broke off from the Diocese of Tucson mainly because of the growth that was taking place. And I'm only the 6th bishop here in the diocese, considering the age of the diocese. That's quite amazing. I was recently at an ordination of a new bishop in Cheyenne, and that diocese is about the same age as ours, but they've had like 10 bishops. So here the bishops have all served for extended periods of time. I think Bishop Girk was here almost 40 years,
Wow.
which was quite amazing.
And what's the geographical area for the Diocese of Tucson?
So I used to think we were a huge diocese until I visited in Cheyenne and realized they're twice as big geographically as we are, but we're 43,000 square miles. We're kind of like a U wrapped around Maricopa County. So we go north of Phoenix on the east and west to Parker and to Payson, then come down all along the west, so Yuma, San Luis, all along the border to Douglas, all the way up to Safford and to Payson on the east side. So it's a huge diocese geographically, which is what will be a blessing having a second bishop here, because I can't really do all of the confirmations that take place because our diocese is so spread out. So having two will be helpful.
And after you retire, you can still do that work?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay. You remain a bishop?
Yeah, you remain a bishop and still do many things that you did as the ordinary of the diocese. The only difference is, and most retired bishops will say this the first thing, they don't have to go to meetings and they don't have to deal with administration. They can be pastors, which is why they were ordained.
We'll bring you the news when the next bishop is named. Now to the northwest side of town, where 2 fire districts are considering consolidating. Golda Ranch and the Mountain Vista fire districts already work together, and their boards voted to explore consolidation. We talked with the chiefs of both districts to find out what it means. So why are the 2 districts considering consolidation? Let's start there.
Well, it's something we've been talking about for probably at least a year. And really, we've been talking about it in the context of sharing services. And we currently do that with IT support and with fleet support. We contract with Golda Ranch to help us in those 2 areas. But you know, the more we work together and start to have conversations about other opportunities, I think it became clear that a 2-station fire district consolidating into an 8-station fire district really makes a lot of sense, because we're in a pretty heavily populated area, I would say, right on the outskirts of Tucson. We're a busy fire district. We're pretty much 100% supported by property tax. And if you look at that long-term sustainability piece for Mountain Vista, it made sense for us to look at opportunities to consolidate with other agencies, and Golda Ranch just seemed to be the best fit for our organization.
So what does consolidation mean as opposed to merging or closing Mountain Vista or expanding Golda Ranch?
Well, there's a definite difference between merger and consolidation. Merger means you're bringing 2 entities together to create a new entity. Consolidation is one entity that's essentially absorbing another one to become that first entity. And that's essentially what we're doing with the Mountain Vista and the Golda Ranch consolidation. So when we're said and done, Golda Ranch will be the organization that will be moving forward, and Mountain Vista will not be in existence anymore. It'll still be in our history, obviously, but it'll be part of the Golda Ranch Fire District.
And this is, at this point, would we still call it a proposal, a proposed consolidation? Where are you in the process?
So both fire boards have, we requested a consolidation with Golda Ranch, Mountain Vista did, and then Golda Ranch accepted that request for consolidation, and now we're in a period of gaining public input as well as distributing information out to the public. So we had taxpayer notices that went out this week. From here, we go to we have a public meeting this week at Mountain Vista, and then we have another public meeting next week at Golda Ranch. And then July 17th is our date where both fire boards would review it in a public hearing and then take a formal vote as to whether we consolidate or not.
We put a call out on social media for some questions from people who live in the area, just wondering what they would ask you if they were sitting here instead of me. One of them was, how will this affect response time and maximum service capacity?
Well, I think that it's absolutely going to improve the depth of our response capabilities. I mean, right now we enjoy an automatic aid system, but when you come together and you find those benefits, those efficiencies, it always makes your system better. So I think it's going to really make us have more bench depth, I guess is a good way to say it. And I think that in the end, the public's going to be the winner because we're going to be able to reduce the redundancies, we're going to be able to reduce the duplication, and essentially provide the same excellent service with the same culture and provide it in a very rapid timeline as well.
One of the other questions we received was, will we lose facilities? So that might speak to your reduction of redundancies. Will there be stations closing or?
No, there won't be any stations closing. And honestly, at this point, I don't even see a loss of jobs, simply because we are so lean in Mountain Vista. We don't have a lot of support staff. And the fact that we're already contracting with Golda Ranch to help us in a couple of those areas is indicative of that. So really, you know, our employees would fold into their HR structure, or they would fold into their finance structure, which we currently use outside consultants for those capacities. So I don't think you're going to see a lot of change initially with the two organizations. I do think you're going to see a lot more bench strength, as Randy said, as well as more robust resources available to us collectively as a larger department.
So for the average person who lives in Mountain Vista or Golda Ranch's area, service area, what changes if this goes through?
In my opinion, nothing's really going to change in the sense of initially there won't be any real difference. I think eventually they'll see that maybe the trucks will have a different name on it, something like that. The station might have a different name on it, but really the culture of both of our organizations are so similar, they're so customer service focused that the organization really strives to provide the best possible customer service. So really, I don't think they're going to see any changes in that service level. I think they're going to see enhancements.
And what about cost? Are you charging similar rates? Would rates change for either residents of either district?
So right now, Mountain Vista for the 17-18 budget's looking at $2.35 for a tax rate, and Golda Ranch is looking at $2.29. And on the impact notice, it does state in there by consolidating the two districts, we would be looking at a stabilized rate of $2.29 across the board.
We should clarify that's property tax rate assessed against every $100,000 of assessed
That's
value.
correct.
Exactly. So, and for a fire district like ours, we're about 80% residential in Mountain Vista. We're very landlocked. We only have about 3% vacant land to develop. So we're not doing this right now out of desperation. We're actually operating from a position of strength at this point, but we know 5 to 10 years down the road, we're going to be really challenged financially because we only have that property tax base and it's not going to be growing. So for us, to your question of how this is going to benefit the tax-paying public, it's going to be a long-term benefit for them. They're not going to see property tax rates escalate year after year for Mountain Vista because we're going to be now a part of a larger district that actually has a better growth potential overall than Mountain Vista does right now.
And I think what's important to note is that a lot of the land and the areas of development that Golda Ranch has is to the north, and everyone knows that that's really where the development will occur. So you're essentially, to the question of whether or not it's going to benefit somebody in Golda Ranch's fire district, because the tax rates are going to be roughly about the same, in the first year, we kept that, we're trying to keep that tax rate there because there are going to be some unexpected expenses. But to Cheryl's point too, I think we will stabilize a great deal because you have a broader net assessed valuation to essentially levy your taxes over. And as that land is developed, that's all infill growth. And that growth will help support the tax rate and will help support and stabilize those taxes. Because really what we want to be is as fiscally responsible as we possibly can.
That's it for us. Next week, we'll look at the search for Tucson Unified School District's next superintendent. Thanks for watching.